Hello. Today we're going to be looking at how to make 3D objects in SketchUp. And the main tools that we're going to be focusing on today are going to be the PushPull Tool, which we've already discussed, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth today on that one, as well as the Follow Me tool. And also on top of that, we will be discussing some other ways to create complex geometry, which isn't available in a tool. So let's take a look at the push-pull tool. So quick little review. The push-pull tool allows us to take any 2D surface and basically extrude it or pull it up into various configurations depending on what it is that we're trying to achieve. Now, one of the things that we touched on was the fact that we can use the push-pull tool to also create openings or holes or indentations in another surface. So if we draw a rectangle on the surface of this object, we can push it in to give the impression of a window or something like that. But one of the things that we can also do is if we use the offset tool, which I haven't discussed to this point, but the offset tool, as the name implies, allows us to choose a surface or a perimeter or a series of lines, and by clicking on that area we can drag it inward or outward from that surface. So for example, in this case, if we wanted to set up some walls, this would be a quick way to do something like that. So once we've offset it, then we can push this surface down, and if we make our cursor stop on the bottom edge and get that little note that says on edge and click, then that will also erase that bottom surface. So in a way we've got a bit of a square tube. But now, why would I want to do that? Well, I've created some walls, and since most buildings are built using walls, this is a quick way to do that. So as I mentioned, though, we can use the push-pull tool to create openings in our structure, or our walls in this case. And the way we do that is by, as demonstrated earlier, just click on that surface that you want to create an opening with. And if we push it until we touch that back face, but as you can see, it's not easy to get it to stop when it's on face. I happen to have gotten it here, but an easier way to do it would be to just move our cursor up to the edge that defines that back face. And since as a push-pull tool, I can't really, it doesn't matter where my cursor goes, it'll only move in one direction. So if I move my cursor up to the top of the building where I can see the back edge of the face that I'm trying to reach, and just click once I hit that back edge, you can see that it immediately cuts a hole in my wall. So, I would do that for doors and windows and things of that nature. So similarly, once again, if I click and then just go up and touch that back edge, you can see it quickly can create an opening. Okay, so that's how we can use the push-pull tool in a bit more of a practical way. Now, one thing I want to point out is if for some strange reason our two faces of our wall aren't perfectly parallel, and I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. If I were to pull this edge here a little bit out from the corner in this direction, something like that, I know these two surfaces might appear parallel, but if I were to try and use the push-pull tool now to create an opening, it won't work, because when I get to this edge, since the back edge isn't parallel, you can see I've got a bit of a ghost of a line there. And if I go up to my view on my styles toolbar and click on the X-ray tool, you can see it looks like I've made the window, but for some reason it won't punch the hole. And the reason being that those two surfaces aren't parallel. So if you find that your holes aren't being cut properly in your object, there's a good chance that the two faces aren't perfectly parallel. So that would usually explain how that could be a problem from time to time. If that happens, then you have to try your best to fix it by, first I would bring that face back out level. Then I would quickly take my pencil tool, click in this corner, and then hold it along this edge until I get a purple line, or in this case, since it's along the red axis, and then lock my tool on that axis by either hitting the right arrow key, notice how the line turns thicker, or by holding down the shift key. Either one will lock it, and then I can just come over and touch it to the corner and pull that up to there, and then I can see how much that my wall is out of alignment, and then by clicking and dragging this down to the bottom edge, it repairs it, and I can erase that little extra line there. And now when I go to punch that hole, it'll work. Okay, so that's sometimes going to happen, especially if you rely on tracing off of an image or an AutoCAD file, and it might not have been drawn perfectly parallel to begin with. So some of the other things to know about the push-pull tool, as I mentioned at the beginning, any flat 2D surface can be push-pulled up into a three-dimensional object, but you'll notice that it won't let us do anything on a curved surface. So we can only do surfaces that are perfectly flat. Okay, so any curved surfaces like this won't be able to be push-pulled, at least not without a plugin that might be available in the 3D extension warehouse. Okay. So another thing that is good to know about the push-pull tool, if I have a series of items that I want to have all the same value that I've push-pulled, let's say I copy this object a few times and I want to have 5 copies of that. That was a bit of a problem because I have a hidden piece of geometry there, so I'm going to reverse that and go the other direction. So let's go this way. We'll move it towards us and multiply that times 4. So I now have 4 objects. Now, if I use the push-pull tool on the first one, take it up to a certain height, I can repeat that exact dimension simply by double-clicking. And each time I've done one setting, a double-click the next time I use it will give me the exact same amount. So, and if I were to want to create certain levels repeated with an edge, if I hit the control key, you'll notice I get a little plus sign that comes up next to my cursor, and so if I double click it, went the wrong direction. If I go up to this height and double click it, you can see how it's like making little levels or equal parts of a whole. Okay, so the push-pull tool has a few little tricks that you can speed up your modeling with. Okay, so let's get rid of those items for now and continue on with what we were doing. So the next tool that I want to talk about is the Follow Me tool. Follow Me tool is right below the push-pull tool, and it's a interesting little tool that if you use it in the what feels like the straightforward way to use it, it can be a little challenging depending on how complex your surface that you're trying to use might be. So the Follow Me tool is activated by clicking on it here, and I've got this path that I want to drag this outline along, almost like if I wanted to create a handrail for a complex stair or something like that. So once I've got the tool selected, when I click on the surface and then just start moving it along this path and wait for the line to turn red. And you can see I'm not clicking anything, I'm just literally following the line with my mouse. And I can get all the way to the end, and I've created some complex geometry just by having that surface dragged along that face. Now, one thing that I want to point out, if I undo that operation, is the location of the surface relative to the path is important. So you'll notice that I've got the similar sized profile over here, but offset from the actual path. So if I were to do that, you'll notice I can now drag it along that path, and by zooming out and coming back, I can do the same operation, and if I'm lucky I can get all the way to the end. But you can see how it's not actually on the path, it's offset in the same amount that the original profile is set from the path. Okay, now there's a better way actually than trying to drag our profile along this path, especially when we've got a complex overlapping turns and things of that nature. Another way to use the Follow Me tool is to actually select the path before we even activate the tool. Once we've got that path selected, we can use the what's called the automatic method, and I've got it. And once I click on the Follow Me tool, if I then click on the profile, either one, when I do that, it automatically projects that profile all the way along the path. So you can see how that could come in handy if you use your imagination and how you might be able to use something like that. So let's say we wanted to create an intricate picture frame with this kind of a profile. We could simply select the surface of the rectangle that the frame has to follow, then get the tool and then select the profile, and you can see how we can quickly create a very interesting and intricate frame. Okay, so another possible use, we might have the outline of a floor plan, and instead of trying to build each of the faces one by one with different openings and things of that nature, if we know what our profile of our wall is, like a wall section type of outline, we could simply select the face that building has as far as like the outline of the floor goes, select our Follow Me tool and click on that, and you can see how quickly I've created a 3-story facade all the way around the perimeter of this outline. So you can see how that could quickly speed things up. And if I wanted to add a roof to this, all I need to do is draw a line along one of these edges up here that defines the inside, and now I've got a roof. Okay, so you can see how that could easily help you get some things done quickly. Some other uses for the Follow Me tool, if I needed to create some basic geometry in simple forms, something like a cone or something like that. So a cone is simply a triangle rotated around a circle. So if I select the circle and my triangle has been drawn relative to the center of that circle and out to the outer edge, select the tool, and there's my cone. So you can't get much easier than that for creating some otherwise difficult to create geometry. Another possible use would be we might have an intricate profile of something like a particular vessel of some type, like a vase or glass or something that's cylindrical in nature but otherwise very complex looking. So if we were to once again create a circle for that to spin around, select that face or the circle, and then get our tool and then click on our profile, and then you can see how we can quickly create some interesting geometry. Okay, so that's our an interesting use for the Follow Me tool. And one popular one that people always want to know how to create, how do I make a sphere in SketchUp, since most of the tools are flat objects that are push-pulled into 3 dimensions, but you can't do that with a sphere. So the easiest way that I know of to make a sphere in SketchUp would be to rotate a circle around a circle. And so if we were to copy our profile here and then rotate it to a 90-degree angle relative to this surface, I'm just going to get the rotate tool and then lock it in a vertical orientation. So I'm going to drag it around so we can see that a little bit better. Find the center point of my circle, click there with the rotate tool, come out to the edge, hit my control key, drag it up to make a duplicate, just like with the move tool. So I now have 2 objects that are the same. And you'll notice that it rotated exactly 90 degrees. And now, since I've already got my surface selected, if I click on my Follow Me tool and then select this profile, you can see I've created a sphere. Okay, so that's how we can quickly create a sphere. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's another way to create complex 3D geometry, and that's to use an operation that we can only find in a submenu after selecting our object. So let's say I have this object that I want to subtract some of these objects from. In other words, have them sort of take chunks out of our building. So if I were to move this cone into proximity around our building, something like that, and our cylinder here, if I were to move that over to take a chunk out of the back, maybe something along those lines. And last but not least, our sphere, if we move that over into our building so that we've got it something like that. So now I want to end up with the volume. If I had this square here or cube and subtracted this, and this from it, what kind of interesting geometry can I create? So the way I do that is I select all of the objects and then I right click and I get this interesting term here, Intersect Faces, and then I'm given 2 choices, with model or with selection. 95% of the time I'm going to recommend you choose with selection, which means only the items that you've selected will be used in the operation. So I'm going to choose that, and as you can see, let me just back that up for a second. The objects, where they intersect with each other, there's no edge. Currently they're just sort of sitting there, but if I were to intersect these faces using the with selection part, you can see how it creates a line. And then all I need to do is subtract the pieces of geometry, and you can see that it has now created a curved face like that. And if I subtract the pieces of the sphere, let's get our corner there, you can see how we've got a nice little circular punched out piece there. And last but not least, the cylinder, and using my eraser tool, I'll just drag it across some of these edges, and you can see how that's another way to create a little bit more complex geometry. Okay, so the difference, if I back this all the way up to before I, is it going to let me? Before I actually made this selection, if I were to select everything except the cone this time, as such, and then if I were to select Intersect Faces with Model, if I were to choose Selection, I don't get this piece taken away. I can still move it away and, oh, see the sticky geometry is stuck to it at the bottom, but you can see that it didn't actually cut out the cone or leave an impression of that cone. So if I were to move that back over there, if I were to select everything except the cone and now do Intersect Faces with Model, even though I didn't select this one, anything touching any of the geometry that I selected, even things I didn't select, will also come into the equation. So we're back to as if we had chosen with selection. So the reason I usually use with selection is so that I don't accidentally subtract pieces that I don't mean to. Okay, so the Intersect with Model, you might not be aware of some hidden geometry that might be there when you make the object, and that would just cause some major headaches. Okay, so that's the difference between the Intersect Model and Intersect with Faces selection. Sorry. Okay. Now, one last little piece that I'd like to demonstrate is a feature that a lot of people don't really pay much attention to, and that's called the auto fold. And the auto fold feature, what that allows us to do is if I try to move this rectangle up off of the plane in the blue direction, you can see that it just kind of disassociates itself from that. If I were to use the auto fold feature, which is the Alt key, if I hold down the Alt key when I pull this up, you can see how it instantly draws faces from those edges in 3 dimensions. Okay, so the auto fold feature is a handy little thing that we can use from time to time to create some otherwise unusual geometry. So if I were to do a selection of that smaller circle and then use the move tool and hold down the Alt key when I drag it up, you can see I'm going to get some interesting auto created surfaces from that selection. Okay, so sometimes it gives you some unusual results, like in this case, but if it were something that you had some kind of strange roof line or something along those lines, this might be one way to create the edges that you might need. Okay, so that's our quick summary of different ways of creating 3D geometry, and most of the basic tools that we covered were the PushPull tool, the Follow Me tool, the Intersect with Faces command in our submenu, and the auto fold. So, thanks for watching.